Hey nerds, what's up? So I got so many responses to what my next big thing in fantasy is, so I wanted to hop on and talk about your guys' top theories and talk about some of the things you guys said I missed. So we'll get into it after the jump. Okay, I can't tell you guys how happy it made me that you guys wanted to discuss the next big thing that will come out of fantasy as much as I did. There were so many comments, and I noticed that you guys were saying kind of like the same things over and over again, and so I wanted to address them all in one place to kind of talk about what everyone's top theories are. Now, you may have noticed that I changed the video title a few days after I released it. What am I kidding? No, you didn't notice that. Who would notice that? But I did. And the reason is that my first title was What's the Next Big Thing in Fantasy? And I realized that was confusing because that's not actually what I meant. That was not a very precise wording, right? Because there's plenty of things that are big in fantasy that aren't big, you know, cross generations and cross genres. And so I changed it to asking the question, you know, what's the next fantasy thing to make it big, which I think is a little better, because some people are like, well, you forgot this and this. I'm like, oh, those are totally big in the fantasy sphere, but we're not talking like Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, where everyone knows it. So just wanted to clear that up. First, before we get into your theories, we have to address the MCU thing again. As much as you guys try to convince me in my comment section that it belonged in this category, I am more convinced than ever it doesn't. But like, here's why. So, no denying the MCU has had huge cultural impact. Like, I am not denying that at all. It is. I mean, everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows the language surrounding it. It has huge cultural impact. But I'm specifically talking about a fantasy book that makes it big. And I know we included Star Wars, but Star Wars has spawned so many book series. It was kind of something I thought after I published that video. Like, I've read a ton of the book series, and I know people are very committed to those. So I think that is maybe why Star Wars feels that way. Another thing is that Star Wars ended, like, because I'm only talking about the original trilogy, like, it was one thing and it was over, which kind of helps us point to it. Like, the MCU at this point, it's just forever going. Like, it's not ending. And so I feel like there's not something I can just like point to. Like the first movie, Iron Man, came out in 2008. So we're still going, 13 years later with no signs of stopping. Now, there could be an argument that like, hey, Endgame ended the main thing. And if that's the case, okay, but Endgame like just came out, so we still can't talk about if it will stick around. I also really liked what Ian B had to, I said Ian. Do you guys watch Mythic Quest? Ian B said, oh, I love Marvel, but with the Disney fixation of the MCU, they are going to milk that cow for as long as they can, probably forever. It lacks a sense of past and authenticity you get with the others. Now, I can't necessarily say that. I did like the MCU, but I do agree that Disney milks everything they have for everything it's worth, maybe too far. So that also I think is going to be an interesting thing to see play out. But as it stands, no denying MCU has had a huge cultural impact. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily belong in this list. Okay, and most of you agreed about what I said about Game of Thrones, which I thought was pretty interesting. You guys all said that my assessment of it was pretty accurate. The only thing we need to look for Game of Thrones that could cause it to have that permanence, I think, would be if Martin finishes the last two books and with a different ending that people love. And I guess there's also some like prequels or other things in that world in the works, and if those can be very successful, it might help the Game of Thrones permanence issue. So we can kind of look at that. Okay, so now let's go over your guys' top theories and some of the franchises you guys thought I missed. Now, a expansion on what I said. We're looking for cultural permanence and cultural permeation. Now, cultural permeation, I have to re-emphasize. This would be like if you went and knocked on all of your neighbors' doors, so like apartment doors, neighborhood doors, whatever. You go and knock on all your neighbors' doors and you ask them, have you heard of Harry Potter? Have you heard of Star Wars? Have you heard of Lord of the Rings? Like, it would be so hard to find someone who said no. Now, there's a lot of things you guys are saying that are really popular in fantasy, but it wouldn't have that permeation. Like, if I go knock on all my neighbor's door and ask, have you heard of Wheel of Time? I'm gonna be honest, a lot of them haven't. Have you heard of Pratchett? I know he's knighted, he's amazing, you know, I think he's a genius. People aren't gonna know who he is. So we're really talking about like that breaks out of just fantasy, which is very important. Also very important, this is not a value statement. So works that I say don't fit this category does not mean they are not as good as Harry Potter, Star Wars, or Lord of the Rings. As we know, things that become famous have a lot of luck to them and just timing. Now I personally love all three of those works, so I'm gonna stand behind them as good works. Do I think they are better than everything else? No. They hit the right amount of certain topics and timing they came out and just luck at being picked out to be those big things. There are plenty of other things that I think deserve just as much attention that just didn't get it. So just because I'm claiming that your work that you love isn't this, it's not a value statement, if that makes sense. Okay, so the first thing a lot of people brought up was Pokemon, which I think is very funny because in my original kind of outline for this video, I actually was gonna talk about Pokemon. Pokemon for sure hits cultural permanence and cultural permeation, no doubt. Who doesn't know who Pikachu is? Everyone knows Pokemon, and it just has never left. My kids are so obsessed with it. The difference is that I just don't put it in the fantasy book category because it's not. Now, we own a ton of Pokemon books. I know they exist, trust me. We've read everyone, I swear. But it wasn't a book franchise. I put Pokemon more in with Mario, the game side of thing. It feels very much more game oriented. So it's just not this discussion. Again, we're not covering everything that has a cultural phenomenon. We're specifically looking at fantasy book series. Next up, Twilight. This is my bad, guys. I think my personal dislike for Twilight clouded my judgment. A few people brought this up. I will say that Twilight definitely had cultural impact. Man, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing about Twilight, seeing Twilight, being around Twilight. Now, I have read all of the 4 main books. I think some more of them have come out recently. I don't really know. But I read all 4, so I feel like I can say that I disliked them. I'm not a romance person, so that I struggled with that. I did read them as a teenager, which I think helped. I never even watched the movies because they came out when I was old enough and I was like, dude, I don't like this. But I did read them when I was a young teenager and I did enjoy parts of them, but I just always struggled with romance, even as a teen, so that's why I didn't like them. I don't want to trash on Twilight. I really love Lindsey Ellis's video about Twilight, so check that out if you haven't seen it. It's very good. But that being said, definitely had the cultural importance. Is it gonna have the cultural permanence? Are people gonna keep reading this? Now, my husband was like, no teens are reading Twilight today. And I'm like, how do you know? Do we know teens? I don't think I know a single teen.
My name is Sprite Pepsi, and I'm abstinence until I die.
So let me know in the comments if you know a lot of teens, if you're a teacher or something, or you're a teen yourself. Are people reading Twilight? I feel like because Twilight had such a polarized reaction, you either loved Twilight or you hated it. There was just no in between. And because of that polarization, I have a hard time feeling like it will keep the same momentum as generations go on. So that's my opinion on it. I'm not saying that is truth, but that's kind of where I think it stands. Next up, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna hurt your feelings. The Avatar: The Last Airbender is not it. Not it now. It doesn't have the cultural permeation that you guys think it does. I'm sorry, I know people are gonna hate that I said that. But everyone's like, Avatar, it's been so influential. Guys, so many people haven't seen Avatar. There's not language that's really in our vernacular from it. A little bit, maybe, and then the Fire Nation attacked or whatever, but I think that's more of an internet sensation. I haven't just seen people saying that out and about. I think it's pretty generational. I haven't seen it really expand multi-generational yet. Gosh, I know you guys are gonna hate that I'm saying this, but I have to tell you guys the truth. I think it was also really hurt by its bad live action adaptation. So I heard it might be getting another live action adaptation or something. That could definitely push it forward. I'm not saying that the book is closed on Avatar. I'm simply saying as it stands now, I do not think it has reached the levels we are talking about. I'm so sorry. Okay, Percy Jackson. A lot of people talked about Percy Jackson. I should say that I never actually read Percy Jackson. I felt like I never got into it and then I felt too old, so now I'm just waiting to read it with my son. But I do feel at the time, if anyone remembers, Percy Jackson and Harry Potter were kind of head to head. People kind of fight, either you're a Harry Potter person or you're a Percy Jackson person. I don't know if I'm remembering that wrong, but I do feel like Percy Jackson really had a lot of momentum, and it just by luck or whatever, Harry Potter just kind of beat it out. Now, again, Percy Jackson is one of those things that was hurt by a movie adaptation that fans loathed, from what I know. and that the general public who hadn't read the books also didn't like a ton, so it kind of killed it. I heard there's a new TV show coming out for Percy Jackson, so if that's true, I think Percy Jackson actually still has a good chance. Because it was so popular and really being compared with Harry Potter, I feel like if it can get a super good adaptation, it might throw it up into the sphere. Now, some people also brought up, though, these adaptations that are TV shows aren't as open to the wide audience because you have to have like a Netflix or a Disney Plus or some sort of, subscription versus just going to the movie theater. So that will also be interesting to see play out. As it stands now, Percy Jackson isn't there, but I wouldn't say it couldn't be. That's just my opinion. Okay, so those are the things that kind of already exist. Now, we had some predictions for what you guys thought was going to be the next big thing. So let's talk about it. Wheel of Time. So many of you are putting way more hope into this Wheel of Time adaptation than I am. I have been burned way too many times. I don't have any hope left, but so glad to hear that everyone in my comment section does. You guys really seem to think that this TV adaptation could make or break Wheel of Time. I think there's going to be a few factors. Is this Wheel of Time adaptation going to really play to fans, or is it going to try to play like a Game of Thrones thing and be a wider audience? How adult are they going to make Wheel of Time? I can honestly see it going either way. There's definitely content in the books that is adult, but could be downplayed or upplayed. So I think that all those factors are going to matter a lot, but I love that we have the hope for it. I have a hard time seeing people going back and reading like a 14-book series, even if the adaptation's super good, like just a wider audience. But you have to tell me, Game of Thrones fans, like, did you hear people who didn't like fantasy wanting to read the books after watching the show? Because I feel like a lot of my friends, like good friends who've never read fantasy but loved Game of Thrones, none of them had any interest in going and reading the books though. They're like, that's still like too fantasy bookish, but I love the TV show. And I feel like if you're gonna be a mainstay, you have to convince people to go and read the books. So I'm curious about that, but I love that everyone has so much hope for Wheel of Time. But what was the number one thing that you guys all talked about? Sanderson. You guys all, just like me, just desperate for Sanderson to make it big. I think the general consensus is that Mistborn is the way to go. If Sanderson's gonna break out of the fantasy genre, he's going to break through with Mistborn. I'm going to have to agree with that. Mistborn is kind of on that border of adult and YA. I do think there's actually a lot of adult content in it, but it could be pushed very YA if they wanted to. I think it does have that border. I think there's a very good chance. The reason is that Mistborn is a tight trilogy, and it's the kind of book that I think could easily be adapted into a movie. There's not so much detail that's going to be lost. I think it could do it. A lot of you really want to see Stormlight adapted. That's going to take so much budget if it's live action. A lot of people want to see it as more like an anime or animation. I'd prefer live action, but mostly because I don't think animation's ever going to really break out into the adult scene. I know that's very unpopular, but there's just so many people who, even if it's an adult cartoon, don't watch it a ton unless it's like, funny, like, South Park sort of stuff. So I'm one of those people who just like is never drawn to animation unless I'm watching it with my kids. So that's like maybe a personal bias, but it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Someone also mentioned Skyward, which I think will break our little Cosmere hearts. But as it stands, Skyward is a YA and could probably do very well. So I'll put hope. There's a lot of people who think that the Cosmere is going to be the next MCU, and I have to kind of disagree. The MCU was connected very straightforward. It wasn't very complicated. The Cosmere is complicated in a way that I don't know if general audiences are going to really enjoy. That sounds rude, but anyway, it's a curious thing. I don't think it's going to be able to do it, but I would wish it like all of you. Next up is Shadow and Bone. A lot of people are hoping for Shadow and Bone. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you follow me on Instagram, I talked about this on my Instagram recently. So I actually ended up watching the first episode. I was not planning on doing that because I literally never watch an adaptation before reading the book. I made that promise to myself like a decade ago, and I haven't broken it. But I was like, I'm probably not gonna read YA. So I watched the first episode and I was super intrigued. Overall, people told me, don't read Shadow and Bone, you're not gonna like it. It's very young, but you'll probably like the duology Six of Crows after, which skews more adult. So I've heard pretty much all positive things from Shadow and Bone. So maybe if they keep adapting that, it could be the next big thing. It'll be interesting. It could gain momentum. I think it's definitely one to watch. A couple other fun things. Someone corrected me on Batman, which I totally loved. I don't know a ton about Batman. Brian Melgar said, If you ask a lot of Batman fans, they'll say that the definitive Batman is the animated Batman. They said that in a previous comment. I'm obsessed with Batman. I do concur with that assessment. It's been around since 1992. So I thought that was kind of cool because I talked about there's no definitive Batman, and he was like, actually there is among fans. So I really like that. Thank you for letting me know. Lots of people talking about wanting a person of color as an author or a person of color as a main character. That would be very good, or maybe a female main character. If you noticed, our 3 works all have white male main characters, just one female author, although white. So I really hope that as well. I hope we've expanded enough that we could see that. Definitely hoping. A lot of people also talked about streaming services. Are streaming services changing the landscape? Are we not going to see that next big thing because we're consuming media in such a different way? You know, I've seen a lot of these kind of discussions in the music industry with streaming, how we may not see these giant pop stars anymore because the music field has been so diversified. And so now that we have all of these streaming platforms making their own content, are we similarly diversified in such a way that we won't see these big phenomenons anymore? I think that's a very interesting question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that below. And your thoughts on any of these things I've said. Did we talk about the things you mentioned in my comments? I'm so excited to continue this discussion. So please tell me below, do you think Twilight should have been included? Is it going to keep going on multi-generational, or do you think it was just kind of like a single generational thing? What do you think about streaming? Is the animated Batman the definitive Batman for Batman fans? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please subscribe. It is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as some like rants or other talks about nerdy stuff, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.